Chapter 8. I half expected Mama to come marching into the house after the last train whistle blew that evening, but she didn't, and no one delivered a telegram from her either. Soon, an empty Sunday stretched before us. My whole body ached 100 times that morning. I felt my cheeks, my forehead, the back of my neck, checking for fever, but though my fingers tangled cold on my skin, no unnatural heat warmed them. We needed a quiet, peaceful activity. Do you have any books we could read? I asked. Ollie nodded and scrambled to his shelf in the corner while I lit the kindling in the parlor fireplace. I figured they owned a Bible for sure, which would be quite appropriate for the day, but I hoped she'd return with a story that would capture their attention for a length of time. The little flame caught, then blazed to lick at the larger logs. I warmed my hands for a few minutes before establishing myself on the sofa. The children scooted close. Ollie handed me a book, a piece of red silk jutting from the pages about a third of the way through. Miss Ada was reading this to us. She said before so much in that one word, before Miss Ada got sick, before Miss Ada went to heaven, before some time it was good to go back to before. I ran my fingers over the gold embossed letters stamped on the front and smiled. Heidi. My mama read this to me when I was about your age. I lifted James' chin, and to my brother as well. Where's your brother? He asked, suddenly interested. In France, like your daddy. He knows Daddy, Dan said. No, I don't think so, but I smiled, imagining these children's father, Frank, was it, crossing paths with my brother. Will? What if they met, became friends? Hush now, and let Becca read. Ollie tapped the book before poking Janie's thumb between the baby's rosebud lips. The fire crackled, warming the room. Janie fell asleep in a bundle on the floor while Heidi's world stole all thoughts and grief from the rest of us. The fire died a bit. We read on until my stomach rumbled loudly. James sat up. I'm hungry too. A soft knock at the back door destroyed the last vestige of our peaceful tableau. James raced from the room. I followed, stepping over sleeping Janie at my feet. Why are you here, Sheriff? Nobody did nothing wrong. James' little boy swagger carried from the kitchen. I arrived at Sheriff Jeffries, ruffled the wispy curls on top of James' head. I'm glad to hear it, son. But when the sheriff raised his gaze to me, his eyes lost their twinkle. How are you? Fine. His simple question stirred a nervous twitter in my belly. He glanced down at James, and I breathed in relief. Of course. He'd have heard about the nosebleed yesterday and come to check on us. Mr. Crenshaw had said someone would. We're fine, really, we are. I watched his hat spin beneath his fingers. May I pour you some coffee? The sheriff nodded and threw one leg over the bench at the kitchen table. His hat slapped the flat surface. He pushed back his damp hair and rested his head in his hands. Another tingle of uncertainty sailed through me. I had enough on my hands with the children. I didn't need a melancholy, I can't say that word, sorry, sheriff as well. The coffee pot sat on the warming shelf at the back of the stove, but little heat radiated from the dying fire, and the remaining coffee had thickened since this morning. Dared I throw it out? Mama always said waste was a sin. I swirled the sludge at the bottom of the pot and shrugged. From the look of things, Sheriff Jeffries probably wouldn't notice anyway. The thick liquid dribbled from the spout into the cup, and I carried it to the table. He didn't look up, just lifted the cup to his lips and sipped the drink without complaint. We never thought it would come here. We never thought it would come here. He crackled the cup in his hands. He cradled the cup in his hands, even though I knew no warmth seeped into his fingers. Didn't think what would come. I glanced at James, then leaned down to whisper in his ear, "Scoot now. Let me talk to the Sheriff Jeffries." James hurried from the room. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat. Never seen anything like this flu before. He pulled a newspaper from his coat pocket and slid it across the table to me. Got your mail out of the box. Didn't figure you had time to think of it yesterday. The Dallas Morning News. My heart danced. Dallas had to be nearby if they received its newspaper. I tried to keep the excitement from my voice. "Does this come every day?" He nodded, drained the last of his coffee. Frank liked to keep up with things beyond the junction. He clankled the cup back on the table. "I guess I'd best be going." He stood as I did, but I kept one eye on the newspaper, greedy to drink in the words of the place I longed to be, the place Arthur lived. "I'll come check on y'all as often as I can," he said. "Thank you." I patted the newspaper as if to assure myself it would still be there when I returned from seeing the sheriff to the door. His boots clomped across the floor, his hat twirling in his hands. I felt sorry for him, though I wasn't sure why. A wail rose from inside the house. I gestured toward the sound. "I understand." He jammed his hat on his head and hurried across the yard. "Wait!" I ran outside, heedless of cold or rain or mud. "Can you tell me if the doctor sent a telegram to my mother?" He rested one foot on the tire of his automobile and gazed at me across its top. "I don't know. I'll find out." He cranked the engine and drove away, while the high-pitched cry called me back inside. Dan sat on her. Ollie bounced the screaming baby in his arms. "Sat on her?" I looked at Dan. I wanted to see if she was as squishy as the sofa. I slapped a hand across my mouth, but laughter bubbled up anyway, coming out as a snort. I pressed my lips together tight, not speaking until I regained my composure. I shoved my hands to my hips, hoping to mimic Mama's sternness. "You shouldn't sit on your sister." Dan hung his head and shuffled away. James followed. "I'll get Janie a tea biscuit. She'll be fine." Ollie carried her sister from the room. I plopped down on the nearest chair, my legs and arms splayed out, weariness consuming me. I'd thought being in Prater's Junction would afford me a few weeks to concoct a plan to get to Dallas, to Arthur, to a whole new life, and I'd hoped I'd have my aunt's help in that. Things certainly hadn't proceeded as I'd expected, but I still believe God has sent me here for a reason. Of course, the only lasting reason I could imagine was Arthur. Dan wiggled his way into my lap, tucking his head beneath my chin and pulling his knees to his chest. My arms circled his warm body as I sighed. I wasn't sure how long I'd be here in Prater's Junction with the children, but I was certain my time here would not be dull. Exhaustion claimed the children early that evening. I carried 3 of the 4 up the stairs to bed, their bodies slack with sleep. Only Ollie managed to climb the stairs on her own, barely. My body longed for rest as well, but my mind refused to be still. Embers from the afternoon blaze glowed in the fireplace, lighting my way to the parlor lamp on the table in the center of the room. A circle of light grew wide as I turned the lamp key, illuminating not only the room, but the painted lilacs on the lamp's globe, and the newspaper on the table. I snatched the paper into my hands and settled into the upholstered chair closest to the table to scan page after page. War news, agriculture news, local events. Then I reached the short blurbs about the Spanish flu. More cases cropping up in Dallas. Be diligent to prevent becoming ill, hospital beds filling, death notices rising, and Camp Dick under quarantine. I bolted upright, my heart thudding like a horse's hooves on the hard ground. I had to write Arthur. I had to know he wasn't ill. My gaze searched the square room. No desk that would house pen and paper. Lighting a smaller lamp, I carried it to the kitchen and searched the drawers in the tall Wilson cabinet. Still nothing. Back in the hall, I stood before the closed door of the downstairs bedroom, Aunt Annabelle's bedroom. Perhaps it had been her sanctuary from the scurry of little feet, her refuge in a long evening. From here, she might have written letters to the children's father or read his letters to them. But the feel of tucking my aunt's cold arms into her best dress, fastening shoes on her still feet, haunted me. Did a whisper of her remain there? Did I dare intrude? In spite of my hesitation, my worry over Arthur demanded an outlet. I placed my hand on the doorknob, then sucked in air and paused. Closing my eyes, I pushed the door open, releasing my breath at the same time. It took a moment before I found the courage to look. Brightness seeped from the small lamp in my hand, dispensing the darkness. A sharp wind careened through windows left open to air out the room. The chill set me shaking as I placed the lamp on the side table. The room burst into full view. The bed stripped clean, ready to be made. The empty porcelain basin on the washstand. The rocking chair moved to the other side of the bed now, near the chest of drawers, and shoved into a corner a combination bookcase, one half composed of shelves closed behind a glass door, the other half a folded down writing desk and drawers. Window sashes fought against meeting their sills, but I eventually managed to lock the wind outside. Still shivering, I pulled out the straight back chair tucked in beside the bookcase, lowered the desk, and rummaged through the pigeonholes and drawers. Writing, paper, envelopes, pen, and ink. I gathered them to the desk and greedily, as if they were Arthur himself instead of my means of communication with him. Then I spied a bundle of envelopes crammed into a lower slot. I eased the letters into my hands, leaving the other encounterments forgotten. I swallowed hard, unable to tear my gaze from the bold scrawl across the top envelope. Annabelle Williams, Prater's Junction, Texas, United States of America. From Frank? Guess him? My stomach rolled as I glanced back at the open door, but there was no one here to care whether I read the words not meant for me. I needed to know what the letters contained. This man would come home a widower, 4 small children, a farm left solely to his care, if he returned at all. Perhaps he'd been injured. Perhaps he'd already boarded a ship for home. Should I read the first letter or the last? I let the letters slide to the desktop, fanning out like steeping stones across a shallow creek. I picked up one from the middle and removed the single sheet of paper within. Excuse me. My eyes zipped over its contents. It didn't go on for any length, but it was a nice letter, just the same. One of profuse thankfulness to my aunt for stepping in, instructions to his children, but few endearments. A letter like I imagined my daddy would write. Remembering my urge to write to Frank, I pushed aside the envelopes and pulled a blank sheet near. Dear Mr. Gresham, my name is Rebecca Hendricks. I am Annabelle Williams' niece. I regret that I must be the one to inform you of the illness and untimely death of my aunt 2 days ago. Just before her passing, she sent for my help. I didn't know of her keeping your children, but I promised her I would stay with them, at least until other arrangements could be made. Would you have any instructions for us on this point? Again, I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news. I understand you've had quite a lot of that since your arrival in France. Sincerely, Rebecca Grace Hendricks. I folded the letter into an envelope and copied the address from the corner of his letter to my aunt. After I sat it aside, I wrote to Mama, letting her know I'd stay with I would stay with Gresham children until I heard from their father, or Arthur. Then my hand finally took up its original task. A smile curled my lip as I imagined the letter I'd receive in the coming months, rambling missives that would still my heart. I felt for sure. And when the fighting ended, Arthur and I would fly together into the wild unknown, living in Dallas or New York or maybe Europe. Entire scenes stretched before me like a moving picture show, complete with tiny piano music. My pen scratched against the paper, frantic words imploring Arthur to stay well, heavy words concerning Aunt Annabelle's death and burial, laughter, tingled descriptions of the children, adorations of my beloved. Come to me soon, I urged again and again. I signed my name with a flourish. By the time I folded my thoughts into the envelope and waved the ink of his address dry, my mind longed for sleep to capture and hold me. I climbed the stairs with heavy feet, telling myself that Mama would reply soon, by letter or telegram. Once she knew the circumstances, she'd come to help. And once I'd convinced her and Arthur that the Lord had brought me here to Texas to speed our plans for the future, Arthur and I would embark on the life God intended us to live, in a world so much larger than the one Mama and Aunt Annabelle had chosen to inhabit it. All right, I'll see you next week for Chapter 9.